Sometimes it seems like we can't even have a discussion about what's going on in the world without being at each other's throats. Today we're going to talk about that. Stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people. Some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Corey Nathan started out as a stockbroker by day while studying at a theater conservatory at night. Since then, he's been an entrepreneur with one foot in creative pursuits, having built such endeavors as a niche executive search firm, a theater and film ensemble, a residential and commercial service company, a 501c3 to help folks during the pandemic, and most recently, a new media content company. Now, Corey's work is focused on collaborating with people across religious, political, and social divides to help understand and repair some of our culture's rancor. A growing audience has been enjoying the engaging, provocative, and fun conversations about these subjects on the podcast Corey hosts. It's called, get this, Talkin' Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. I really like that. It's the reason why I invited the guy to be on this show, because that's just how it is. You know what? I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and when I first moved here, I joined I shouldn't tell this story because maybe a couple of these guys will be listening and they'll piss them off. But anyway, I decided to join the senior softball team. Yeah, I'm a senior, in case you can't tell by looking at me. Senior softball team. I love playing ball. And so these guys were nice guys, but it was coming up on the election, and Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. And I had a Clinton sign on my car. And this one big old Southern boy came up to me, put his arm on my shoulder and said, "We don't like you." And I said, "You don't?" He said, "No, because you like Hillary." And I said, "Hey, man, I'm just here to play ball. I'm not here to talk about politics or your buddy Trump."
Yeah.
And with that, he stormed off. And I didn't last very long with that group of people. It was just too much, racist talk, stuff like that. One time a guy said, it was right after Trump was elected, and I heard these two guys talking. One guy said, "You know what, we can now say whatever we want because Trump's president." And that had to do with their racist attitudes. So I stopped playing with those guys. Anyway, well, I don't know why I started telling you that. But
no, Bob, you remind me of a story of, this is something that's been happening for a long time, and I'm sure you could attest to that. I grew up in a very observant Jewish household, but I became a Christian in 2000. I started going to church, and I realized I became a Christian based on these really deep theological, philosophical convictions. But I realized when I started going to church, I wasn't joining a bunch of people who had necessarily the same theological convictions that I did. That group of people was more primarily defined by these other factors. And it came up, it really started coming up when after 9/11, and the U.S. went into Afghanistan, and then especially Iraq. And then in 2004, this is similar to your story. I knew which way our church was going in large part. And then we went on Saturday nights. We also went on Sunday mornings. But anyway, we went to the Saturday night service. And on Saturday night service, I saw a Carrie Edwards bumper sticker on one of the cards in the parking lot. It was a big church. Like people, about 2,000, 3,000 people total went over the course of the weekend. And I knew that was just such a minority position. And I had developed a nice rapport with the main pastor there, this guy named Tom Givens, who subsequently passed away. And he's a nuanced thinker, and I had a great relationship with him. And I jokingly, I went up to him. I said, "Hey, Pastor Tom, did you see that bumper sticker in the parking lot is a Carrie Edwards bumper sticker. And I was joking because he knew that I had purple points of view when it comes to this stuff. And he said, Corey, you're joking with me, but I've already received dozens of emails saying, Pastor Tom, what are we going to do about this? As if somebody voting for a Democrat was sinfulness that the church body had to address. It was like dire. And I thought, man, so what kind of delusion are we under that somebody couldn't possibly even think about voting for a Democrat? That's when I knew that I was already ensconced in a bunch of conversations in the church about political issues and how to think through our theological convictions. And I knew that there was something amiss. But that's 2004, man. Fast forward to 2023. And I can't say that things have gotten much better.
Oh, no, they've gotten worse, at least in my opinion. I just think that it started, to me, when Barack Obama was elected. So many people with their anti-black attitudes hated the fact that we had a black president. And they began to look for every single way they could to denigrate the guy. And Donald Trump was leading the charge with his birtherism bullshit and all that. And it's just gotten worse since then, I think. And the fact that Trump then became president, like this guy that I told you about said, that gave us permission to say whatever we want or do whatever we want. It doesn't matter how hateful it is. And where are you located? Where did that happen?
I'm in Southern California, but I'm about 30 miles north of LA in a district, California 27. So it's a very purple district. Our U.S. House district was decided by 333 votes in 2020. The Republican won, but that represents less than 0.1% of the votes cast. Wow. So it's a very closely divided district. It's very dominated by Masters College, which is run by John MacArthur. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He makes Ronald Reagan. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good comparison, but he's one of these like young earth creationist types when it comes to religion. Oh, yeah. 6 literal 24-hour days. And his politics, he's not availing himself well when he asserts himself politically. He's asserted himself as quite a misogynist here in particular of late. But that's a very dominant, he's a thought leader, if you will, for what that's worth in this valley. But politically, we have a lot of folks who work in the industry, in the entertainment industry. I do think it's a very diverse, very purple district, but Republicans, specifically nowadays MAGA Republicans, are the loudest voices in this district, despite the fact that they're a plurality, if that. They're certainly not a vast majority.
Yeah, that's the way it is here. I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and it's just total deep red. And I go to this barber shop. I like local places. I don't like chains. And so I go to this barber shop. It's called The Bearded Stag. And it's all for guys. And it's a nice place. I like going there. I like the woman that cuts my hair and all that. But I was sitting in a chair waiting for my turn, and I noticed there was a sticker on the side of the little refrigerator that they have there. And the sticker was a Trump 2024 sticker. And I thought to myself, you know what, I should just get up and walk out of this place. But I didn't, because I don't want to hold everybody there responsible. And not only that, can't we get along? Why should the fact that the owner of that barbershop is a Republican that likes Donald Trump, why should that get in the way of me getting a haircut with a woman that does a good job that I enjoy having cut my hair?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think we tend to do that where we'll see one symbol like a Trump sticker, or somebody did that to you with your bumper sticker in 2016, and then we'll chain a set of thoughts and assumptions about that person. I don't want I don't want to do that. I want to catch myself when I do that. And for me, like in our neighborhood, honestly, like this is my own prejudice, but it's there's a reason for it. It's when I see a big old pickup truck with a big old American flag waving from it, I already have these other assumptions. They're fair assumptions, but assumptions nonetheless. And I want to catch myself doing that because my disposition now is I want to give somebody every opportunity to take an off ramp. If they are in the MAGA world, if they are in that, 2020 election stolen thing, I want to give every opportunity for an off ramp to that person. I also want to give every opportunity to include so that I can get into the conversation. Because if a guy like me isn't in a conversation with a guy like that, he stays in his epistemological bubble. The only hope that we have is relational ice breaking, relational chipping away at those assumptions, chipping away at those prejudices, chipping away at the this side, that side kind of mentality, this warlike mentality. So I want to be in those conversations. And
so that's the reason you started this podcast?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've been having these conversations for years and years. As you can imagine, on the religious front, I had to have a really tough conversation with people in my family, close friends, about why I got a kid who grew up in we went to an Orthodox synagogue, very observant Jewish family, why I was a Christian all of a sudden, and they were hard conversations because it was the guys who were wearing crosses on their shields that were swinging swords and beheading my ancestors. Those were hard conversations. But then when I went into the church, I realized the church was primarily, and we mentioned this already, the church was more primarily defined by political and social positions of a vast majority of the people that I was going to church with, not by theological convictions. And the reason I say that is because when it came to it and we came across a piece of scripture that was at odds with the majority of political preferences in that church community, we would ignore those pieces of scripture. We would try to do mental gymnastics to ignore it, dismiss it, as opposed to deal with scripture and say, oh, wait a second, there is actually a political position that I could support that's not orthodox to my political party, whether it was Republican or now it's a magnified version of it. So if I wanted to be in those conversations. And then fast forward to, I discovered the podcast medium. I've been producing some theater and some film over the years, and I love this medium. I thought this podcasting was a great place to have some of these conversations and try to redeem it in a way, because it's been hijacked. These conversations, these subjects have been hijacked, not by a vast majority of us who are somewhere in the middle. Not all of us are extremists, but the conversations have been dominated by extremists and what I call screamers. So I say, you know what? Let's redeem some of these conversations for folks. And you and I, Bob, probably disagree on a number of issues. Maybe we disagree on certain politicians. That's my guess. But I'm guessing that we could have an intelligent, principled conversation about issues and really dive into it without screaming at each other, without wanting to throw, mashed potatoes at each other's throats.
I think you're probably right. I named my podcast Lean to the Left. There's an important word there, lean. And that's just because I tilt a little bit to the progressive side, but I am not a hardcore libtard.
Yeah.
As the Trumpers would say. So I sometimes think, man, I should have not used that title, but anyway, it is what it is. Here I am. But what I do is I try to bring people on my program to talk about important social issues and that are important to everybody, not just Republicans or Democrats. And issues like climate change, like racism, like fairness, like equality, and on. And so that's where I'm coming from with my show. And And
no, it's good to.
I feel like it makes a contribution. I hope it does.
Yeah, no, it's good to have these conversations and explore these issues. I think it's also good. The fact that you and I are talking, I think it's also good to take a half step outside of. A lot of times we have this tendency to stay within our bubble, right? To talk to folks that can only affirm what we already believe. and give us more language or more ammunition for those positions that we've already arrived at, as opposed to gathering information that might challenge what we already believe, that might at least give a little bit more nuance to certain positions that we hold. So I give you a lot of credit for the lean part.
That seems to be the way it is on social media. We gravitate towards people who agree with our positions on things, and so you're talking to the choir all the time. You're really not reaching out and expanding your influence in any way if you just focus on, let's say, Facebook groups that agree with your point of view. Right?
Yeah. I'm going to inject a little bit of God here, and this is what I mean. We could joke and we could say, if everybody just agreed with me, the world would be a much better place. But here's where God enters the picture. Even I have two foundational beliefs, two things that I believe empirically, verifiably true to myself, but I can't empirically verify to anybody else. And those two things are, there is a God. And number two, what I believe even more firmly than number one is, I ain't God. I'm not God, because I know what an asshole I am. Like, in my heart of hearts, I am just a complete asshole, right? So the truth is, okay, we could debate whether there is a God. I could prove to you that I am not God if you knew what thoughts were going on in my head. So the truth is, if everybody agreed with me, the world wouldn't be a better place. I'm glad that there are much better people in the world than me.
I am not going to get into the is there a God conversation or not. Let me just tell you this, man. You were raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. I was raised in a conservative, fundamentalist family where my dad was a former Catholic who became a preacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And my mother used to forbid me to watch television when I was a small child, which she called the box of sin.
Okay.
We were not allowed to dance. We weren't allowed to do any kind of dancing, whether it was slow dance, or the jitterbug, or anything. That was sinful. And I grew up in a situation where my dad was running special evangelical services where he'd bring in these guest pastors, some of whom were pretty big names and others were just yokels who wanted to be. And but they were all up there doing their hellfire and damnation stuff. And it turned me to the point where I just can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah. So you had the Jerry Falwells and the Jimmy Swaggarts and the...
Oh, man, I'm telling you what. And we used to have to go into these revival services, and my brother and I, and be Mr. Goody Goody Two Shoes, and we were not.
Yeah.
So anyway, such as that. So I just like the idea that we can talk about this kind of stuff without killing each other.
Yeah, that's a good start, right?
Yeah. Oh, man. So tell me, what do you think some of the factors are that are exacerbating the rancor that causes so much angst and even anger among people today?
Yeah, man, we could spend a lot of time just trying to figure that out. I think that there are a few major factors. One is, we've already touched upon it. It's folks that are staying inside their bubble, whether it's on social media or broadcast media. We have a tendency, Steve Hayes, who's one of the founders and is the CEO of the Dispatch, I heard him in an interview from 2019, prior to when they set up that new media platform. And he was talking about that the reality of the news business is that already, this is 4 years ago, already there was so much incentive for contemporary news, and I put that in quotes, news outlets to be in the affirmation business more so than the information business. And he was prescient because we saw some of the filings from this case, this big Dominion versus Fox News case, where they explicitly were having those conversations. Hey, we know what we're saying, that this is bullshit, but yet it's pissing off our audience. So we better reverse course and feed them what they want. So I think that's a problem. And it's partly on us. It's partly on me as an individual consumer of news. Number one, to develop better discernment about where I'm getting my news. If there's folks who just blanketly say, oh, I can't read anything in the Washington Post, I'm going to tell you that, look, man, at the very least, there's some good reporters in there. If you're not reading Robert Costa and saying that this is a serious journalist, then that's on you. It's not really on the Washington Post. If you can't read George Will, Kathleen Parker from your neck of the woods and say that there's serious commentary, serious opinionators in there, then that's on you. The Maggie Haberman in the New York Times. There was a time when I was watching Fox News on Sunday because Chris Wallace is a serious journalist. I'm having a hard time finding some serious journalists on there now. But the fact that they fired Dan Bongino, they fired Tucker Carlson, I think is a step in the right direction. And we do know that there are some canaries in the coal mine there that are at least trying to say, hey, this is true and we need to call the election. When Chris Stirewalt was there, for example, running the political news division. So that's part of the problem is we're looking for affirmation rather than information, but it's on us. There are good journalists out there. There is good information out there. And I do think there's a turning of the tide. I do think there are some independent media outlets like the Dispatch or like the Bulwark where there's good news, there's good information, there's more nuanced opinion. But it's on us to seek that out and to inform ourselves a little bit better, to nurture our intellect a little bit, and to nurture our curiosity. If all of us could have maybe not radical curiosity, but just a little bit of curiosity, I think that would go a long way. And then the other thing is, again, our own prejudices, getting outside of our bubbles, taking some time to be among folks that have different opinions than we do, different preferences than we do, who vote differently than we do, go to different churches or don't go to church at all than we do, and develop relationships with them. I think that if we are only in conversations that are transactional, where we're trying to get into a debate, prove the person wrong, launch some perfectly shaped rhetorical grenade, and that's all we're doing, we're not getting anywhere. We're not doing anything. But if we have an ounce of curiosity and, that's interesting. Why do you think that? Have a little bit of that when we're talking to somebody that is different than us. I think that'll go a long way too. But it's not going to happen with the snap of a finger and we're going to change the whole world. It only happens in small degrees, one person, one conversation at a time. So those are a couple of the things I think are causing it, but a couple of things that I think we can do to help fix it.
I think that you make some very good points. So you do think that it's possible to work through these differences and to have better conversations and maybe even nurture relationships across our differences?
I do. But I think if we set our expectations properly, I think it's more realistic. And what I mean is a lot of us get frustrated that, oh man, things are just terrible now and I can't do anything about it. And then even if you do get into a random conversation once a year and you walk away incredibly frustrated, oh, that person still wants to vote for Trump in 2024, you're going to set yourself up for disappointment. But if your goal is to nurture a relationship, as opposed to win a conversation, win a debate, win a contest, if your goal is to nurture a relationship, and it's hard sometimes because sometimes you walk away thinking, man, that person is just, I don't like that person. They hold views that are so abhorrent to me. It's hard for me. But that's when our own virtues are tested, when we love the unlovable, or at least the unlikable. That's when, not when it's somebody's easy to like and attractive in all kinds of ways. That's not when our virtues are tested. When our virtues of generosity and grace kick in is when we're around folks that are harder to like me. So if our goal is to nurture that relationship and not to convince that person to go from wanting to vote for Trump to voting for Biden in one conversation, not even on a particular issue, but maybe just 1 degree. Maybe just if you give them one moment of pause to say, I never thought of it that way. If that's my goal,
Tell me this. There's this guy here in this neighborhood where I live. By the way, my neighborhood is called the Farm.
Okay.
And what an oxymoron that is. It's
Man.
nothing but a bunch of anthill houses, probably, I don't know, a few hundred. And I feel like I live in a freaking anthill in this place. But anyway, that's another story. There's this guy. He's got this big black heavy-duty pickup truck. And he puts, like you were talking about, he puts this great big huge American flag in the back.
Yeah.
So it's always there. He's also got on the side of his door a big sign that it's a "Let's Go Brandon."
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say
Let's Go
it.
Brandon sign.
Yeah.
And he's got big stickers on the back tailgate, "Let's Go Brandon." And I see him all the time in my neighborhood. And I get so tempted to stop him and say something to him about what an asshole he is. But then I go, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that. That's the wrong thing to do. I mean,
Yeah. So I've had
it's
conversations.
so disgusting to me.
Oh, I know. I've had conversations with people just like that exact profile. And one recent one I had, it was, I was being a little bit of my father would call it a Titzkamacher. He really meant Sursmacher, or like a troublemaker. I was being a little bit of a troublemaker. And it was after, I forget which thing passed. It was either bipartisan infrastructure or the thing that Joe Manchin pushed through about the Medicare and some inflation-oriented stuff, some energy stuff. It was after one big piece of legislation. It was the gun legislation that was led by, what's his name, Cornyn from Texas.
Oh.
On mental health and a couple other things in that big piece of legislation. And I go, yeah, let's go, Brandon. And it was clear that he hadn't had any conversations outside of his bubble, because he said, one of the things that he said in the conversation was, you couldn't possibly believe that 80 million people actually voted for Joe Biden. What has the guy done? I said, actually, it's not a coincidence that he's gotten a lot done, but it's all been bipartisan or bipartisan leading. Cornyn, a Republican senator, leading negotiations for the gun legislation. Sure. The most conservative Democrat in the Senate leading negotiations on the inflation, which didn't really have to do with inflation, but there were some good things in that bill. Or the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act. They've all been bipartisan pieces of legislation. This guy hadn't even heard it. All he heard about was, oh, this guy's he's just walking around the White House in his underwear. Like, dude, it's because all you're listening to is affirming stuff in this little circle of yours. Let's get outside of it and actually have a conversation. I don't know. It is hard. I'll give you one more story and then I'll shut up. So something outside of the political sphere. We aired a show about a month ago. You might have heard of this guy, Daryl Davis, brilliant piano player. Okay. But Daryl has, over the course of his life, he's an African-American dude. Okay. Over the course of his life, he's befriended almost 200 KKK members. And it started with a Grand Wizard approaching him at one of his shows and saying, hey, man, I don't know you, something along the lines of, I don't want to be around to see you, but I like your music. Your music is good music. I guess he was playing a country show or something like that, because he plays all day. He plays jazz and blues and country. And Daryl's like, yeah, all right, that's cool. Let's get a beer. And Grand Wizard says, don't you know who the hell I am? He's like, yeah, let's get a beer. They got a beer. They became friends. And he's had literally almost 200 now former KKK members renounce their beliefs in the KKK. And it all started with, hey, man, let's go grab a beer. You know? Yeah. That's it. It's just overcoming that and, I don't know, finding something. Not trying to win a debate right out of the gate, because you have no context, no frame of reference other than your differences. But if you grab a beer and, I don't know, talk about USC, South Carolina, Clemson, finding something, some other point of context as a commonality.
What are you supposed to do when you get in a situation where the conversation turns to gun violence? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what your position is on guns and all that, we're in a situation where we've got all these people running around with assault rifles, and most of them that are doing these mass shootings happen to be white males. And there are always calls for some form of gun restrictions or control of some sort to reduce the number of guns that are out there, or to restrict who can obtain them, when they can obtain them, how they can obtain them, and all of that. So you get into a discussion with somebody, and it becomes rancorous. How are you supposed to deal with that when you've got hard, cold facts that you're looking at,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at their set of hard, cold facts, and there's no way for them to come together? How do you deal with
that? The question is a hard one, and I would pose it because I have friends who are strong gun rights activists.
Yeah.
I also have a lot of friends who are very strong in the stronger gun legislation movement, Moms for Action, Gun Action. I forgot what the name of the organization is off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but it's Moms for.
Moms.
Yeah. So I know folks in both camps. They're firmly entrenched in both camps.
Right.
So my question to both is, if, let's say, Democrats won both houses of Congress, 60 seats in the Senate, they had the executive office, president, and somehow were able to win back a majority in the Supreme Court. Over time, appoint enough judges where they had the majority in the 5-4, 6-3 in the Supreme Court. Let's say that was the case. And there was serious discussion about writing some legislation to really implement some strong gun legislation reform to safer streets, safer communities. Would we have any folks who are gun rights activists in the room to have that conversation? Or would it be all driven by the most anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment? Like, would it all be driven by the most orthodox people in that one camp? And the same question goes for folks who are card-carrying members of the NRA. If you held that, there's 6-3 majority currently in the Supreme Court. They had both houses of Congress for a second there between 2017 and 2019. They had the executive branch. If you were, would you enter into a conversation and allow some folks from Moms for Action in that room? If we can do, because I believe that a vast majority of us aren't 100% one way or the other. Right. I believe that and it goes for other issues too, abortion, for example.
Yes, absolutely.
Can we have a larger conversation with, there's somebody cited a stat that said 40 to 42% of us are really independents. And I believe that stat. Whether we lean a little bit left or lean a little bit, 42% are independents. So can we have the conversation there? Or is it being driven by the Marjorie freaking Taylor Greens of the world?
Yeah.
She sees somebody like me, for goodness sake, she sees Pete Wehner as an enemy. She sees people who are longtime conservatives, longtime soldiers in the conservative movement as flat out enemies. And I say, take that space back, but we have to have the hard conversation. We have to be willing to disagree. We have to also be willing to admit to ourselves, do you want to make some progress or do you want to be right? I had a conversation with Pete Dominic a couple of weeks ago, and it was clear to me that it was more important for him to be right than to actually make some progress on this stuff. It was more important for him to beat up on folks that are slightly outside of his worldview than it was for him to have a conversation with somebody who he disagrees with. It was more important to him to address the dumbest versions of arguments that he's heard that he disagrees with, as opposed to do what somebody like what's his name? He's a great columnist in the Washington Post. E.J. Dionne. What E.J. Dionne does, and why he's such a great thinker, is that he engages the best arguments from another side of the argument. Not the nut cracking arguments. He doesn't look for nuts and try to crack them down. So I think if we're able to do that and engage the best arguments that are oppose us, that's a much more productive way of going about it.
Yeah, you brought up abortion, and that's certainly one of the hot button areas that divide people. So is this book banning stuff and in the critical race theory stuff. Even climate change, Corey.
Yeah.
We still have people who, I was in a conversation the other day with somebody, and they were saying, what about climate change? Where is climate? Where's global warming? I don't see global warming. And I think they were being facetious a little bit just because it was a chilly day here. But nevertheless, there still are people out there who just want to keep denying what's really as plain as the nose on your face, that that we're in trouble with our environment.
Yeah, there are some arguments. Listen, that you can argue with climate change, or tragically, a lot of people would be COVID deniers.
Yeah,
you can argue with science, but it's like arguing against gravity. At the end of the day, gravity is going to win.
That's right.
And sometimes it's going to be a much more tragic end of that debate. I lost 3 friends who were COVID deniers. And I had this conversation with them about gravity. I said, listen, man, you can argue against the existence of gravity all you want, but gravity's going to win that debate. And I hope you figure it out before you hit your head going down.
Yeah.
Literally 3 friends I lost because they didn't want to take the vaccine. They didn't believe COVID was a real thing. I don't know. Darwin had some points. And I hope people that I care about don't really argue, don't get so caught up into that bubble that we're talking about that it costs them life. But there's other things, to your point about climate change, that affects us all. I think it takes us all to reckon with the reality of what's happening on our planet, right? Mm-hmm. Reckon with the reality of what we're each doing to contribute to it, and all take a little part in trying to quit exacerbating the problem at the very least, if not help to slow down the pace of climate change, help to perhaps reverse it. I don't know. It's not an area of expertise of mine, but it falls under that larger umbrella of, you can argue with some scientific facts all you want, but at the end of the day, gravity's going to win out.
Now, you also bring religion into the discussion on your podcast, and we've talked about that a little bit already. Do you believe the religious right is responsible for fostering many of the divisions that exist today in our society?
For fostering?
Or don't you want to, maybe you don't want to point fingers, I don't know.
No, I'll point fingers. I already talked about Johnny Mack. So it's interesting because I started recognizing a lot of these things right when I became a Christian, that political and social beliefs were primary factors, primary identifiers, right? They believed in their political and social preferences and prejudices more so than Scripture itself. So that has been a defining quality of American evangelicalism for years, certainly since before I became a Christian. I think there is a way that the Christian right is now explicitly more defined by these social and political positions. There's really no shaking it. Trump was clarifying. The era of Trump has been very clarifying because years past, you referred to 2008, a figure like Sarah Palin, you wouldn't necessarily call her subtle, but the dividing line and folks who embraced Sarah Palin, it wasn't quite as obvious. To me, it was obvious. I mean, I was interested in the idea of an executive, a state executive, a governor who bucked her own party. That was the introduction of Sarah Palin. And then she opened her mouth. And literally within 30 seconds, I knew what she was all about and who she was appealing to. And she was effective at appealing to people. This distraction of, I think part of the problem is that we get distracted by what I'll refer to as oppositional politics, we know who is against us. We know who we are as defined by who we're against and who's against us. And we need to fight against them. So when that becomes the true north, the compass that we're looking at, that we need to be, as Trump said in his 2010 campaign, one of his main lines was, he's fighting for us. Who's us and who's them? And what is he fighting for? He's not fighting for anything. He's just fighting them. And them is loosely defined as anybody who's outside of the circle of us. And the us is defined only by who's voting for Trump and who's not. Who's for Trump, who's MAGA, who's wearing a red hat, and who's not. So, yeah, I think I don't know if it's the cause of it. The Christian, they're giving succor to, and there's not enough voices within the Christian. But look, if you look at figures like Dr. Russell Moore, he led the ERLC, the Ethics Commission within the Southern Baptist Convention, and he was an early critic of Donald Trump. And look what it cost him. He can no longer affiliate with the Southern Baptist Convention. Beth Moore, same thing. There's so many figures, but they're isolated individuals, and they became isolated, not just because of Trump, but because they dared to say, hey, this sexual predation problem, the sexual abuse that's running rampant within leading figures in the Southern Baptist Convention, this is a bad thing and we need to address it. No, they got booted out. Like Trump was bad enough, and that was the beginning of the division between somebody like Dr. Moore. But how dare he say that leading figures shouldn't be sexually abusing, using their positions of authority to carry out rampant sexual abuse. There's lots of problems, man. We could have not just an episode about this. We could have a series about this alone.
We could. What do you think of the Democrats' decision to wrap Biden in the freedom flag? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, what do you mean?
I mean, his announcement the other day chastised the Republicans for standing in the way of individual personal freedom. And he used all the things that are going on with abortion and guns and people being killed in mass shootings and so on and so forth to illustrate what he was talking about. We have Biden and the Democrats trying to take away from the Republicans the freedom platform.
I think it's brilliant because it pisses me off that certain words have been hijacked. Yeah. The word patriot has been hijacked. The word freedom has been hijacked. The American flag has been hijacked. Evangelical has been hijacked by folks who aren't evangelical, who don't care about freedom, who don't care about real patriotism. I think it's brilliant for him to take that back. Because listen, you get somebody like me, and I'll just say conservatism is another word that's been hijacked. You know what I was most persuaded by? I read some early articles of Bill Kristol's dad, Irving Kristol. He's sometimes referred to as the godfather of the modern conservative movement. And that's real conservatism, but it's classical liberalism. And that's where a lot of folks could probably agree, or a Burkean type conservatism, something that's been around arguably for hundreds of years. So if as a conservative, as somebody who's persuaded by Irving Kristol, that type of conservatism, or a Jack Kemp type of conservatism in more recent history, I believe that what somebody like Governor DeSantis is doing down in Florida is not conservative at all. I'm a small business conservative. So for him to use the levers of government to exact retribution on a company who has the temerity to say, oh, we support our employees, even our LGBTQ employees, right? Exactly. That's not conservative at all. To go into a teacher's classroom and say, you can't talk about racism because it might make some students feel uncomfortable. So you can't talk about that. You can't have those conversations. That's not conservative. That's not having a Socratic dialogue. That's not conservative at all. So I love, if that's what they're doing, take some of those words back. Take patriot back, take freedom back, take it all back.
Yeah, they're working on it. And so you should take a look at Biden's first ad that they just announced that they're going to start running.
His announcement got buried, by the way. He announced the day that Tucker got fired.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. All right. What else did I want to ask you about? You're governor of California,
yeah,
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
He just sent out a email that I received today. Republicans don't give a damn about protecting kids, and they are certainly not pro-life. North Dakota GOP have decided to force women to give birth, even victims of rape. Meanwhile, they voted against providing school meals because child hunger isn't the responsibility of the state. Mandating birth is a state responsibility. Helping feed these kids is not. Got it. That's Gavin's tweet that he sent out today. He says if they were interested in life, they wouldn't cut child hunger programs. And if they were interested in life, they wouldn't allow guns, of all things, to be the leading cause of death of kids. So what do you think about that?
So I love what Gavin Newsom has been doing on a rhetorical front.
Yeah.
I think the rhetoric, he's basically adopting the rhetoric of the Lincoln Project. And I think we're overdue for some
project.
Yeah. We're overdue for some Democratic elected officials to start fighting fire with fire. And this goes against my mission of talk politics and religion without killing each other. Let's all get along with the thing. But you know what? At the end of the day, when something is just flat out wrong,
yeah.
You know what happened in Tennessee a couple of weeks ago? When something is so un-American as to unseat duly elected officials. Why? Because they wanted their voices to be heard. They wanted to represent their constituency. It's happening in North Dakota as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think what Gavin Newsom is doing is he's adopting the rhetorical style and strategy of the Lincoln Project. Now, I don't think that is always required. I think that I would still like to hold space for folks that aren't the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Matt Gaetzes of the world.
Yeah.
I'd like to hold space because there's plenty of Republicans that are a heck of a lot closer to, listen, Cheney and Kinzinger, their voting record was 90% plus with Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could call them from a legislative perspective beyond conservative, more conservative than what a lot of folks in the House are right now. So I always want to hold space for folks that will join a committee to investigate something like January 6th. I always want to hold an off-ramp for that. But at the same time,
go
ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I love what Cheney and Kinzinger did on that January 6th. I mean, I just thought that was, and now even some Democrats are going, Cheney should run for president.
Yeah. It'd be interesting because I think you can make the argument that Trump won in a crowded field because there's this expression in advertising, a black and white ad will stand out in a color world. A color ad will stand out in a black and white world. He was the color ad or the black and white ad when everybody else looked the same. So Cheney now, if Cheney ran, if it was a crowded field, I think she'd have a decent chance.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think Trump is probably going to basically clear the field. DeSantis is proving to be as unlikable and like he's a one-trick pony. He knows what'll score for Win Red. He knows what'll score on Fox News. He knows what'll score on Breitbart. But that's not a general election strategy. And that's proven to be the case. So I think Trump will clear the field. If it's Trump versus Cheney, he's going to win that nomination. But if it's Cheney in a crowded field of Trump and a bunch of Trump wannabes, I think that's an interesting proposition.
Yeah. And what do you think of Nikki Haley?
I am ambivalent about Nikki Haley. I love what she did as governor of South Carolina. Her greatest day was when she addressed what happened in the church and Charlottesville. And then she addressed the flag, the South Carolina state flag. I think there were some really interesting things there. I think she was more aligned with the kind of conservatism that I'm talking about, the Jack Kempian type conservatism. I like the fact that she found a way to keep at arm's length the first 2 years of Trump's administration, learned some foreign policy, represented us in the UN. I liked all that, but I don't like how undecisive she's been in terms of trying to like straddle between I embrace Trump, but I don't embrace Trump. I don't know. I just wish she had the courage of her convictions when it comes to Trump and Trumpism.
If she had the same courage that Liz Cheney had, I think
Yeah.
it'd be something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Listen, it's been great talking to you, Corey. I appreciate you coming on Lean to the Left. And once again, I emphasize it's just a little lean. It's not.
Awesome. It's great talking to you, Bob. I hope it's not the last time.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and that you learned something as well. Please come back on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that I hope you find interesting, entertaining, and enlightening. And you can check out the schedule of upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. You can also subscribe to our audio version there or to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media, Facebook at the Lean to the Left Podcast, Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at BobGaddy_Lean to the Left, and TikTok at Lean to the Left. Our goal is to be informative and entertaining as we and our guests comment on the latest developments in the news and about the social issues that concern us all. This is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.